let's just jump into it. Today, I wanted to talk about why people buy. I think it's an important question to dive into. It's really kind of important for what we do. Obviously, we want buyers to buy. It's what we're here, you know, all looking to do. It all feels good. So, Michael, what your thoughts are? Why do people buy?
Yeah, I might break this into two parts if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Talk about sort of the meta, why people buy in general, and then maybe beyond that, or we can flesh this out later on, why people might buy from us or buy what
Yeah.
we're offering. They do tie in, but there are separate points. So on the first one, why do people buy? I mean, essentially they buy for two reasons. They buy based on an emotion, based on a feeling, and then they're able to justify that in some regard. Without the two in play, it's very difficult to make a sale. So we need them to feel something as a start point, and they need to be able to craft a narrative in their mind that enables them to justify, and that then gives them the impetus to pull the trigger.
Okay.
What about you?
Yeah.
Do you see it different?
I do. It's yes and no. I think it's all the ingredients. It's just where they're placed. And so I've heard many times on emotion and then back on logic. And I think there is, at the surface, I think that's what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
But if we dive in a little bit deeper, I do believe that there's more behind the scenes that we need to address.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always kind of been a believer that people buy based on memory and imagination.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what that memory and imagination sparks is
Mm-hmm.
typically emotion. But
Mm-hmm.
I look at emotion as kind of the byproduct of being able to tap into those memories and imagination.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the emotion itself was the thing that made people buy,
Mm-hmm.
then every time we felt certain emotions, we would just take out our credit card and move forward, right? We would just start buying stuff. And so I think that it is possible to have a sale, to make a sale without sparking specific emotions, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't believe it's impossible to make a sale without someone imagining that solution is possible. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the sale is made in being able to spark someone's memory of maybe consequence or what's happened in the past or letdown or fears, right? And then being able to tap into the imagination of what would it look like to implement a solution? What would it feel like, if your life was different, if your leads were different, if you lost 50 pounds, right? I think those all happen in the imagination, which then sparks the emotion.
Yeah.
So kind of a
Yeah.
cart before the horse scenario, but that's kind of how I look at it. Sales are made with memory and imagination.
Let's unpack it, and we'll see where we land. On the point you made a moment ago about if it were just based on emotion, we just credit card out, buying this, buying that, buying this, buying that. I agree, but it's not just based on emotion. It's based on emotion plus intellectual or logical justification. So I can walk into a shop and I might see, what random example will I pick here? I used to be a big surfer. I don't surf much anymore, but back in the day, I used to be a big surfer. And I could walk into a surfboard shop full of the most beautiful surfboards you could ever imagine. Now, immediately I'm overcome with a sense of desire. The emotional feeling of I want that. I maybe even need that. Maybe my initial feeling. I certainly want it. However, on closer inspection, looking at the price tag and then running the mathematics, thinking about the fact I've got 6 surfboards at home already, I come to the conclusion that intellectually I can't justify this. I cannot justify putting $1,500 on my credit card right now when there's 6 surfboards at home and I've got more pressing needs. So I talk myself out of it and I don't make the sale. So emotionally, I wanted it, but then when I cross-reference that against, can I actually justify it? I can't create a narrative in my mind today that enables me to pull the trigger. So I don't buy it. So you need to have, in my view, you need to have both in play. That's how I see it.
I agree 100%. And I think here's the crossover, and that's why I said it's a bit of a, cart and horse scenario, is the scenario you just spoke about is when I think you even said the words imagine, right? It's when you walk in, you see this surfboard and you imagine being on the water and you get this strong desire. Typically, imagination and desire go hand in hand. But how did you cross-reference whether this was a good decision or not? The memory of being at home with 6 other surfboards, the memory of buying those surfboards, and probably also the memory of situations where you've overspent before and suffered the consequence of that. So even though the emotion and the logic are kind of the end point, you need to be able to tap into the memory and the imagination of those things, which produces that emotion and justifies the logic.
I've got a feeling already that we see it the same way. We just frame it fractionally different, and it's about semantics, our difference. I mean, I get the feeling you would argue the opposite here, but I get the feeling that, you know, imagination and memories, it's not about what it is you think of in the future. It's about how that makes you feel, or how that will make you feel. So you and I can imagine that tomorrow we're both going to, I don't know, get a haircut. So objectively, it's the same thing. We can both imagine what it's going to be like when we go to the barber's tomorrow and get a haircut, but how that makes us feel is completely different. For me, it's a chore. I'm actually dreading it, because for me, it's 45 minutes I don't really want to do. For you, just for the sake of this example, it's a transformation. It's an opportunity to try out a new look, which is then going to make you feel a certain way, which is then going to take you to a certain place. And that really is exciting for you. So you're excited for tomorrow's haircut. I'm actually dreading it. So, but it's objectively the same thing. But it's about the narrative that we tell ourselves, or how it makes us feel, that takes us to a different place. And this is why when we're selling, you know, we have to ask questions that enable them to paint the picture. Because it's not about what it is we're going to do for you. It's about how you will feel on the back of that having had happened. So hence it comes back to what I said earlier. You need to have buy-in on an emotional level. They need to feel a sense of, I either want to do that or I need to do that, ideally both. But you can sell just on having one, i.e. I don't want to do it, but I know I need to do it, which means let's move forward, or vice versa. I don't need it, I want it, and I've got enough money, intellectually justifying, that I can afford it, so bugger it. I'll get my 7th surfboard because I can afford it and I'm worth it. They're creating a narrative where they can justify it to themselves. And what we can justify to ourselves today might not be what we can justify to ourselves tomorrow. My financial situation may be different tomorrow. Emotionally, I may be in a different space tomorrow. Therefore, I can craft a narrative that enables me to pull the trigger. Because, you know, yesterday I wasn't worth it. Today I am. So the desire remains constant, but the narrative I can create to intellectually justify it may change day to day. And therefore, as a salesperson, I've got to be taking them on a journey and asking them the questions, so that the truth of right now is revealed, and then we can explore next steps once it's really clear where they're at and where they want to get to and what factors are in play. Back to you.
Yeah, and I agree. And there's no part of what I'm saying that kind of excludes emotion. We both know that emotion is an important, integral part of making the sale. What I think is interesting, and like you said, it is a bit of semantics, but it's also, for me, in trying to, I've been a big push of getting salespeople to understand the why and not just what to say. And I think, like, even when you use words like paint the picture, right? To me, that's a symbol of imagination. And so being able, as far as, like, if we're going to dive in and present to a brand new salesperson about how do they get the sale, how do they facilitate the decision, right? The mechanics are going to be a lot of focus on memory. What has happened up until now? What do you want to happen? Like, I'm guessing you ask goal questions, challenge questions, what hasn't worked in the past, questions along those lines. All of those questions are either tapping into the imagination or the memory, and that creates a bit of a gap, and that in turn sparks the emotion. So as far as, like, what we have in our control, it's not to force the emotion, it's to facilitate the ability to look back or look forward, and that's where a lot of this energy creates.
I think your points are valid, and I don't disagree with them. I think the reason I frame it the way I frame it is I'm framing it from what I view as a first principle position, in the sense that if I don't have them feel something, typically a sense of desire or a sense of need, and then they can't craft a narrative internally to justify making said change, to me, they are first principles. Without those two things, there's no chance of a sale. Now, the layers that go on top of that might be taking them to a place of visualization and imagination and dreaming and painting pictures, or it might be taking them back to moments of the past, memories, all those things. But to me, they're layers that sit on top of the first principles. They're almost tactics. Okay, so how am I going to get them to feel something? Okay, well, let's talk about a potential next version of themselves, or let's talk about a moment where they felt a certain way, a memory. So that's why I frame it the way I do, without them feeling something, and it has to be a strong feeling, depending on what we're selling. You know, if it's at the supermarket and they're just buying some chewing gum, you know, they don't even have to craft a narrative because it's 50 cents. They see it, they like it, they feel a sense of desire. It's half a second the justification because they see the price tag of 50 cents. They just put in the trolley and make the purchase. Hence that whole strategy of purchase, impulse purchases at supermarkets. But we're selling more complex and certainly higher level ticket items, you know, 5, 10, 15, 25K. They do have to go through a process, unless they're beyond super rich, where it'll still be a really quick decision. They do have to go through a thought out process of, you know, justifying it. You know, what are my alternatives? What happens if I spend this money? How confident do I feel that these guys are the right guys to get me to where I want to get to? This ties in with my other point about why they buy from us. But they're going through all these things and they're ticking those boxes subconsciously or even consciously.
Yeah.
And then they run the equation. You know, I want it and I can justify it and I like this guy and I believe he can help me. All right, let's move forward. But if we don't tick all those boxes, we'll get resistance. We might be able to overcome it, but we also might not be able to. So, yeah, first principles for me are they need to feel something. They need to feel an emotion, typically desire, typically need, can be other things too. And then they need to be able to create a narrative where they can ultimately justify pulling the trigger. There's all sorts of ways we can get into those 2 points. Absolutely, imagination is one of them. Absolutely, memories is another. There are multiple other ones as well. But that's why I frame it the way I frame it. It's about first principles for me. If they don't feel something, if they can't justify it, they won't buy. How we get there, many different ways to get there, including imagination and memories.
Yeah, see, I agree with the first part of that, but I do not agree that there's another way forward beyond memory imagination. Right? When you're talking about consequences, when you're talking about fears, when you're talking about opportunities, when you're talking about desires, I would have a hard time figuring out a path forward without either tapping into one of those two things, right?
Well, let me respond to that, if that's okay. So, in simplistic terms, would we agree that imagination is future paced, and obviously memory is past paced? What about the present?
So, I mean, when someone's talking about the present, are they really talking about this moment right here
Could be.
or here? If you ask me about my current situation, am I going to tell you I'm sitting on the couch? When you talk to a prospect and you ask them about their current situation, are they going to tell you, well, my current situation, Michael, is I'm on a call with you and I'm moving my mouth right now and we're having a conversation and I just said this word, right? Everything that we do, the present is just a small snapshot. So when someone says the present or their current situation, what they're telling you is the most recent past. And so to do that, they have to tap into the memory. The chance of them talking about this specific moment when you're talking about processing, the present, I mean, how many conversations do you have about this given moment, right? So it's just not 20 years ago, but what they're tapping into is the most recent memories of how's it going. And then that's tapping into the byproduct of emotion.
Let me give you an example then of how I would bring things into the present tense. So let's say you're the prospect, I'm the salesperson. Let's say we've gone into the past and you've talked about a painful episode, whatever it may be. And then I've asked you questions about the current status of said pain. And you've revealed that this is still going on. And it's now become clear to both of us that this has been going for 5 years, this pain. I'll bring it into the present right now by saying, so JD, if I'm hearing you right, you felt XYZ for 5 years and it's caused you ABC problems and pain. Is that right? Yep. And you're now telling me that it's still going on. The obvious question I've got to ask is, how does it feel right now to be 5 years into this problem and you still haven't found a solution?
Yeah.
We're now in the present. Now we had the reference to the past, but the past makes it feel bigger. But I'm asking you right now how you feel as a man 5 years into not having dealt with and overcome this problem. That right now, as we speak right now, it's still front and center, as a driving negative emotion. And we're now in a present conversation. We can also then bring in a future. Could you imagine a future where that didn't exist? Imagination. But my key point is I want you to feel enough right now on this conversation, because I want to close you on this call, where if we can marry up logical justification, which we'll deal with later on,
yes,
we can get you to a point, and this ties in with my point at the start of the call, how do we get them to buy from us, where you believe that we can help you, you want us to help you, you can't think of any reason why an alternative is better than accepting our help. It feels right, logistically and economically, you can say yes. Then we'll probably do a sale at the end of this call. You'll have to buy from me at the end of this call. So I absolutely want to bring this conversation into the present, because you can only buy from me in the present.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I understand. For me, like, looking at the first filter in our primal brains is going to be that memory. So whatever questions you ask, whether it's about the present moment or over the last 5 years, what filter is going to go through is that memory filter. Subconsciously, I'm going to ask myself the question, is the information consistent with my past experiences, right? It's when I feel the emotion, it's not typically what's happening in this moment, right? Just like when people feel guilt or shame or anxious, right? It's typically because they're looking forward or looking backwards, right? And so whatever question, I'm going to run that through the filter of memory, right? So the example that I use is like, if you're dealing with a difficult prospect, oftentimes you're not dealing with a difficult prospect because they're weighing this situation, right? I kind of use the example of like, you're in Guatemala, you've experienced some street dogs, right? Sometimes they can be aggressive. And if you take it in the present moment of like, oh, they don't like me, but it's really what I represent based on their past experience. And as salespeople, if we don't understand that, then what happens is we can become reactive. Now, I really do believe that in this situation, someone is weighing what you're saying and what they're feeling based on what they've experienced up until now.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, not any emotion, certain emotions we feel right now are an outcome of past experiences or a life that didn't happen, and thus the feeling of regret and missed opportunity, and that could have been me, and those awful emotions. But at the end of the day, I'm speaking to you right now on a call, and I need you to take a decision on this call. So whilst acknowledging that the past and the present, the past and the future are going to have their relevancy in this conversation, at a certain point, I need to bring it to the present. And I need you to be feeling enough on this call. And what you feel on this call will be referencing, as I said, past events and future possibilities, as well as how you literally feel right now, in order to move you enough so that ultimately you ask me to buy. If I don't bring it to the present in some way, shape, or form, because I mean, I can go back to painful memories of my childhood, but they don't actually affect me now. But if I go back and relive the past, I remember I felt awful then and there, and there were outcomes, but I've dealt with that. I've moved on. Time has healed. I've evolved, whatever you want to call it. So it doesn't actually carry an emotion right this very moment. Therefore, you're not going to sell to me to solve a problem from my childhood 20 years ago, which I've already dealt with. It's not front and center of mind. It's not. I don't view it as an issue that needs addressing. So you're not going to sell to me because it's not a problem that needs fixing. I don't emotionally feel strongly enough about it today, and I don't, therefore, can't logically justify spending money on a problem I dealt with 20 years ago. Whereas if you were talking presently, and something that started 20 years ago in my childhood, still to this very day, carries a strong burden on how I feel, how I view myself, how others view me, performance, outcomes, and it's having a negative impact. You can ask me questions that can expose that, hey, I still feel pain. I'm still in a bad place. I still haven't dealt with this. This is still affecting my life negatively. And then you can wrap that with some logic around it, where I can then justify actually making a change. You'll probably sell to me. So that's how I see it. So we're semantics. I mean, but somebody wrote in the comments, and I agree with that. Memories and imagination without emotion attached to them, I'm not going to say they're irrelevant, but they're not going to be the driver of making this sale. We have to have them feel something that's strong, and then they can create said narrative, justify it, and then we're a pretty good chance of a sale. It's not a lock, but we're a chance.
But I could say the same thing of having whatever emotion you like. Let's say you handpicked exactly what emotions you wanted someone to feel, but they couldn't imagine a solution. You're very unlikely to get the deal. So
I agree.
I mean, you talked about desire earlier, right? Like desire, we both agree is, a great moving point. It's a great motivator, right? And when desire lives in the imagination, right? And so that missing and what my life would be like, right? What would it be like? What would it feel like to either remove the burden or to reach that level of achievement and accomplishment and significance, right? And so for us to be able to make that connection, because if not, they're just like emotions without that desire to move forward, or that, in most cases, I would love to say people are opportunistic, but you and I both know that people are more motivated to remove pain than to create opportunity in most cases, right? And so if they cannot imagine that removal of pain or that opportunity created, I don't believe it matters what emotion that you can create on those calls. If they can't, they will sabotage. If they can't see it, and we've seen it so often.
That's an interesting point. I'm going to push back a little. I think there's an exception. For example, we don't know what we don't know. But if I recognize that I'm speaking to an expert who knows a hell of a lot more about brain surgery than I do, just use that as an obvious example. I know nothing about brain surgery. All I know is that my brain's not right.
Yeah.
I'm so now beaten down that I can't imagine what it would be like to have my brain functioning again. But if let's say you're the salesperson who's selling access to the world's best brain surgeon, if through this conversation you can take me to a place where I ultimately, whilst I can't visualize it yet because I'm so beaten down and my brain actually isn't working well enough to be thinking that well, if you can take me to a place on the call where I ultimately believe that you and your help, I believe you guys can actually help me. I want you guys to help me. You've shown enough credibility for me to go with it. Then whilst I can't imagine what my life would be like not thinking the way I think right now, I believe that you can help me. You've gained my trust. I can logically justify it, because what's the alternative? Keep living like this? That's not an option. I've got the money. So I'll probably ask to buy from you because I'm desperate.
Yes.
I'm desperate for a solution. Whilst I can't visualize my new life, I believe that the odds are in my favor of getting to a better place by letting you help me. So I'll ask to buy from you.
Yeah. And I think that's a perfect example, excuse me, in that the idea is I've dealt with this problem for so long, right? Looking back in the past, it's been such a part of my life. It's just, I can't even imagine what it would be like, what my life would be like. It's just, that is a blurry area. But if I can't imagine that you as a surgeon can solve this problem, I may not be able to figure out my life and imagine, the grass being greener and, what hobbies I'll have. That's not as important, right? There's a lot of people that join UCM that can't really truly imagine what it would be like to live that life, or what it would be like to have $50,000 coming in, or any of these things. But to me, going backwards, the thing that's important for them to imagine, there is no one that's going to join UCM, or there's no one that's going to move forward on this if they can't imagine the solution being better than their current state, past state. If they can't make that realization, no matter how logical it is, I don't think they're going to move forward.
I think a shorter way of saying what I was trying to say with the brain surgeon example a moment ago is, we don't necessarily have to have them imagine the outcome and have absolute clarity on the outcome. It certainly helps in certain situations. We do want them to be able to really paint that picture of what life looks like beyond it. But sometimes we can't for many, many reasons. The outcome's not assured. I don't know what your future is going to look like. Effectively, what we're doing in that scenario, if we're the salesperson, is we are selling to them or asking them to buy in to going on a journey where the likelihood and probability that they'll get to a better place, can't tell you exactly what that better place will look like in detail, but if you believe that the likelihood and probability that you will get to a better place coming on this journey with me or allowing me to help you is of a sufficient enough level, then you'll probably want to come on this journey. And you know what? It's the exciting part that we don't know what it's going to look like. I actually, with a client I work with, a mastermind program, where I sort of really high-level entrepreneurs, I actually sell it in like that. I talk about the opportunity that they're getting access to, and I tell them that I don't actually know what the end result will be for you, but that's the exciting part. You get to write that part of the story. But coming into this group means you're coming into a group with access to this, surrounded by people like that, where the energy and the inspiration and the direction is this. If those things don't tick your boxes, this is not right for you. But if it does, the most exciting part is I can't actually tell you where this will take you because you write that part of the story. And they love it. That's how I sell it in. Yeah. And so that's I think that's a good example of not actually, it is tapping into their imagination, but it's intentionally leaving it ambiguous. And sometimes that's much more exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't believe that they have to be crystal clear about what every day is going to look like in this new life. But I think they do have to be able to tap into the idea that based on my past experiences, I know I'm on a path that I need to change. And when I'm starting to play with probability and this journey and this idea, right, that doesn't exist yet. That situation doesn't exist yet. So the only way I'm going to be able to get someone to see this opportunity is tap into imagination. Now that's different than the clarity of outcome, right? So again, like imagination is one of those loaded words that makes us think about like, I'm on a hillside and in a meadow, I'm thinking about a very clear situation, but the imagination is also about probability. It's also about playing out. To be able to play out a scenario that does not exist yet, I really do believe that is at the core of what we do as salespeople. Is to take memories and then introduce a situation that doesn't exist and get that buy-in. If we don't get that buy-in, then they continue on the path they're on and they don't make any changes.
Well, I don't disagree. Like I think memories and imagination are incredibly powerful, and I'm an absolute advocate for them. Just as I said earlier, first principles, I think emotion and logical justification come first. As I said earlier, and I won't repeat that again. That's the last time. But essentially, we're merchants of change in sales. And what we are trying to do is take people from their present state to a future state, of course. Now, the reason they're in their present state and how they feel about being in present state ties in with, the memories, as you said earlier, and how it affects them today, and what their desires and hopes and needs and dreams are for tomorrow. So, yeah, this is very much a semantics conversation. I think we're going around in circles a little bit.
Yeah, but I think it's really good. It's drawn out some good information, and I think it is a change. I think that the memories and imaginations comes first, and that sparks the opportunity for emotions and logic. You think the first principles, but I think what's important and where we get to in many of our conversations is, without these things, these are the tools we have. We have to be able to connect. We have to be able to get someone to see that things can get better, or that things will escalate if they don't make a change. And they have to feel a certain amount of emotions. They have to back in logic. You have the ability to tap into memories and imagination. Whatever you believe, what's first, what's second. I think the most important, and why I was so excited to have this conversation, is it's really our job to tap into those things. And those are the tools and opportunities that we have available to us. But yeah, like I said, I think where we put them and what you think is important is not as important as being able to tap into those things and being able to help someone navigate and see a brighter future and see the consequence of inaction and all of those things.
Yep. I agree. If you're not able to ask the questions and take them on a journey where ultimately they feel something, whether that's by invoking emotions such as memories and imagination, and then again have them tick those boxes off so that they can go, yep, I can do this, I can afford it, it makes sense, it's better than my alternatives, there's no major reason why I shouldn't or can't do this. If you can't do those things, you're in trouble. and you're going to have a very low ceiling on how high you're going to go in sales.
100%.
Conversely, if you learn to become an expert in those things, the world is your oyster.
100%.
Which
Couldn't have
using
said it
my
better
imagination,
myself.
which using my imagination is a very exciting way to live life.
Yeah, it makes me feel good. Emotions. No, I
Exactly.
love having these conversations, Michael, and I appreciate your insights. Always challenging, and makes me contemplate my way of thinking, which is fantastic. And I think we need more of that. So I think, I mean, we could go in circles forever, but I think we got a clear idea. I would love to hear in the comments, what do you think? Why do people buy? Maybe it's something we haven't even thought about. Maybe it has not. Maybe you think it has nothing to do with emotions or logic, or I would love to hear it, imagination or memory. Like, why do people buy? I think we need, I mean, if this is the craft and this is our vehicle, I think we need to start asking more why. I think we need to be able to challenge the status quo and not just consistently focus on what to say and when to say it, right? Understanding what makes people tick, decision making, and human psychology and behavior and self-sabotage. These, for me, have been much more valuable tools of learning how to sell than any script and framework and sales training I've ever went through. But it takes conversations like this, and it takes that natural curiosity to be able to have these conversations so that we have a stronger workforce. And the more we are independent and allow ourselves to kind of dive into these questions, the more our value increases and the more opportunities we're going to have. And so whatever you believe, that's fine, but just make sure that you're having these questions, having these conversations, and challenging your way of thinking often. You know, one of the principles that Michael talks about a lot, which I think is where we connect, is best idea wins. Right? I'm very convicted, and obviously you can tell I'm an emotional being, but the minute that someone offers an idea that not only challenges my idea but makes it better, I will. I'm kind of like the hermit crab, and so to speak. If there's a better house to live in, right, I'm dropping the old one off and absorbing that. And I think we really need to let the ego aside, and yeah, that's my rant for today. Anyway.